Abandoned and stranded at sea, hundreds of Rohingya refugees are rescued off the coasts of Malaysia and Indonesia. They complain of persecution in Myanmar. Just who are the Rohingya, and is their plight being ignored? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. They're often referred to as the world's most neglected minority, and now about 7,000 of them are believed to be stranded off the shores of Thailand. 25,000 migrants boarded people smugglers' boats from Myanmar and Bangladesh already this year. That's nearly double the number who left in the same period last year. But a recent Thai crackdown on trafficking has left many refugees abandoned by smugglers at sea, on overcrowded ships with little or no food or water. Karishma Vyas sets up the story for us from Kuala Lumpur.
Amina Hatu paid more than $2,000 to save her children's lives. She says she was desperate to escape Myanmar after her ethnic Rohingya relatives were killed by soldiers. She never imagined the traffickers would starve and beat her family, holding them for ransom until her mother paid for their release. Her 8-year-old son died before they could escape.
My son was fine in the boat, but fell sick when we were in the jungle due to starvation. He vomited and had diarrhea. We drank seawater and there was no drinking water in the boat.
Amina and her surviving children arrived in Kuala Lumpur 2 weeks ago, joining other Rohingya Muslims who fled violence and poverty in Myanmar. This week, about 2,000 more were rescued off the Indonesian and Malaysian coasts, hungry, exhausted and frightened after their ordeal. Advocates for migrants are urging regional governments to take action.
Let us now come together. The country has to be open, has to be transparent. You must start having good governance. And most of all, I think this can only be solved if we cut corruption once and for all.
Thailand, which is a transit point for many traffickers, is tightening security to try and stop the trade. The Malaysian government says it's strengthening its borders, but is also cracking down on migrants themselves. Governments in Southeast Asia are under pressure to respond to this rising influx of desperate migrants. But without an end to these ethnic tensions in Myanmar, human rights activists say more of them are going to risk their lives in search of a better life. Karishma Vyas, Al Jazeera, Kuala Lumpur.
Well, let's now bring in our guests. Joining us in Bangkok, Phil Robertson, Deputy Director for Asia at Human Rights Watch. In Tunbridge Wells, Maung Zani, Burmese scholar and human rights activist. And in Kuala Lumpur, Charles Santiago, Member of Parliament in Malaysia and Chair of the ASEAN Parliament for Human Rights. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with the immediate situation, people ending up abandoned at sea as a direct result of the crackdown on smugglers. Phil Robertson, what's the reason for this crackdown?
Well, the Thai government has decided that enough is enough. Evidently, the corruption and the ongoing malfeasance that's been taking place connected to these rackets, and also the pressure from the international community, particularly the United States, which has placed Thailand in Tier 3 of their anti-trafficking report, has finally resulted in pressure on the government to now take action. And this all came together on May 1st when a combined team of police and military went up a mountain on the Thai-Malaysia border and found an abandoned camp with 26 bodies. And since then, it's been the front page of the international news and the news here in Thailand. And the Thai authorities have initiated a crackdown against both local authorities and police.
Well, Maung Zani, consequences of this is a focus on the people fleeing Myanmar and Bangladesh. What drives people to face these immense dangers that they experience at sea?
Well, the conditions on the ground that the Rohingyas have been forced to live for the last 3 years, and perhaps more importantly, the nearly 4 decades of the Burmese national policy of persecuting them on the basis simply of their ethnic and religious identity as Rohingya. So there is a combination of both national policy of targeted persecution by the Burmese central government and the unbearable conditions that have been the result of both the communal anti-Rohingya racism and the Burmese state enforcement of these, rather unbearable life conditions. That's what serve as the prime drivers behind the exodus. Mind you, this is not a new phenomena. The Burmese state began its policy of persecution as early as 1978 February. That's almost 40 years ago. And in those days, the Rohingyas news dotted the front pages of Asian newspapers like Bangkok Post, and using the same language of crimes against humanity.
Well, if I may interrupt, Mang,
cleansing.
apologies, but I'd like to go to Charles Santiago on that particular point that you brought up there. This is not anything new, is it?
Really, it's not new. And what we see unfolding in front of us is a human tragedy. Human tragedy that can be avoided both at the country level as well as the regional level. What we see emerging is a country problem. Essentially, the Myanmar problem has become an ASEAN problem. But none of these countries, including Myanmar, and the countries affected by the human trafficking and the movement of Rohingyas and other minorities into Thailand, into Malaysia, and now into Indonesia, has been properly addressed.
Well, researchers at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum have warned that the Rohingya plight in Myanmar borders on genocide. It says the situation closely mirrors 1930s Germany and 1990s Rwanda. About 1.3 million Rohingya live in Myanmar, making up less than 3% of the country's population. The Buddhist majority there say the Rohingya are illegal Bangladeshi immigrants, even though some are thought to be descendants of Muslim traders who settled in Myanmar more than 1,000 years ago. Today, the Rohingya are denied citizenship, education and land in Myanmar, where they are also targets of sectarian violence and subjected to forced labor. Well, how is the situation within Myanmar being addressed, if at all? Myung Sani, your view.
Well, within the Burmese society, there is virtually or absolutely no support or no sympathy or compassion for the Rohingyas as the direct result of, let's say, 40 years of government propaganda that the Rohingyas were not really who they claim to be, that is the ethnic Rohingya, but they are illegal migrants coming from neighboring Bangladesh, despite the fact that Rohingyas can prove their ancestral roots in the northern Arakan state or Rakhine state of Western Burma, despite the fact that the Burmese governments in the past had officially recognized them as the official and indigenous ethnic community of Burma post-independence. So, and the sad thing is, even someone as revered as Aung San Suu Kyi as a moral icon that refuses to show any ounce of compassion, so let alone the average Joe on the street. And so inside the country, the Rohingyas have no friends, no supporter. The military is pursuing this 40 years of persecution. The society is extremely anti-Rohingya. The local Rakhine Buddhists are out to cleanse what they consider their own land for their Buddhist Rakhines and no one else, most of all the Rohingyas. So the society is in a space that I will call 1930s Germany. The Rohingyas have been made out to be viruses, vermin, pest invaders, augurs.
Well, I will,
and so all kinds
I
of
will
language
return
that
to
are-
that point that you make there about the pro-democracy movement within Myanmar a little bit later. But first, I want to go to Phil Robertson. Myanmar is signatory to a number of international conventions. One, of course, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now, surely this treatment of a minority within the country is an infringement of international conventions that Myanmar has signed. Your view?
Well, clearly what is happening to the Rohingya in Arakan state violates a whole raft of treaties, not just the Convention on the Rights of the Child. What you have is Rohingya, approximately 150 to 170,000 people, locked down in internally displaced persons camps, surrounded by the military and also by hostile Rakhine Buddhist communities. These are people in these camps without livelihoods, without access to education, without access to health, with whatever food and water the international community provides, which is not enough. I mean, so clearly we have violations of children's rights, which is connected to the Convention on the Rights of the Child that you mentioned, but also violation of women's rights. And, you know, Burma has ratified the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Very little that is taking place now in Arakan state in Burma is complying with international human rights standards. What we're seeing is these people made stateless by policy from the Burmese government and essentially being forced into a situation where the only way to get out of that situation is to flee with these brokers who later become traffickers. It's a dire situation. It's so bad that that's why we've seen a significant increase in the number of people fleeing from Arakan state, taking these desperate, deadly trips on these boats, trying to get to Malaysia or somewhere safe where they can actually live normal lives. It's a desperate situation, and it's born of human rights abuses in Burma that ASEAN should no longer allow to permit to happen. I mean, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia now need to work together to really pressure Burma to end these discriminatory rights abusive policies against the Rohingya.
Well, Charles Santiago, you mentioned earlier that this is importantly as much a regional issue as a domestic one within Myanmar. What's your view of that there, that added pressure should be brought by ASEAN nations onto Myanmar to conduct human rights reforms within its country?
Well, in the case of Malaysia, you have about, I think, 150,000 Myanmar, what I would call refugees, but the government of Malaysia will call them illegals, who are already in the country right now. And they put pressure on the services that are provided to Malaysians. And clearly the Malaysian government does not address these questions. First, they are not classified as refugees, which is what the government of Malaysia should do. But given that Malaysia is not a signatory to the rights of refugees or the Declaration of Refugees, Malaysia thinks that they should be treated as illegals. And when they become illegals, they are put in detention camps and sent back to Myanmar. Now, these people will be killed when they go back. So what we are really doing is we are sending these people back to the killing fields where they'll be slaughtered when they arrive back in their hometowns. Now, this is not something that we can support or a region should support. The region, ASEAN talks about the rule of law, talks about governance, talks about the dignity of people, talks about a sharing and caring community, though. And this is the time for ASEAN to stand up and be counted, though. Otherwise, they should just close shop. Though.
Well, Mwangzani, it does appear that
that's
regionally a lot more should be done by neighboring countries, does it not?
Well, most definitely, I would support both what Phil Robertson and Mr. Charles Santiago is saying, that this has become ASEAN's problem, because we are seeing the cross-boundary spillover impact of the Myanmar state's persecution of this particular ethnic community. And also, I think crucially, I think the human rights abuses and violation of international legal obligations that Myanmar, as a member state of the United Nations, that Phil rightly pointed out, they are not sporadic. They are systematic, widespread, and pervasive. So meaning that the intentional and systematic nature of persecution of Rohingya, violates the very UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, which Burma is the signatory, and we ratified it as early as 1949, 1 year after the convention came into effect in December 1948. And I think we are not approaching a genocide or genocidal situation. We have been in the genocidal process over the past 37 years, granting that the scale of direct killings, mass atrocities and mass violence has not approached the scale of killing fields in Khmer Rouge, Cambodia, or Rwanda, or Nazi Germany. But there are other acts of the genocides that include inflicting conditions of life designed to drive people away, designed to destroy the entire community of an ethnic people. That alone itself constitutes and amounts to a crime of genocide. And this is an international criminal problem.
Well, let me go to Phil Robertson, if I may, Wang, on something that you brought up. Specifically, the silence that one hears from the pro-democracy movement within Myanmar itself, including Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi. Even the pro-democracy activists within Myanmar appear to have turned their backs on this issue. Is that correct?
That's certainly correct, and it's very unfortunate. It's frankly unconscionable. But as Zarni has mentioned, the Rohingya have very few friends in Burma at this time. I think that this is an issue that we expected Aung San Suu Kyi and the NLD to stand up on, that we expected that given the amount of support that she'd received during her own imprisonment and house arrests, that she would reciprocate when other people's human rights are being violated. But that's not been the case. She has essentially shirked this issue. And when Human Rights Watch came out with a study of our research about the violence in 2012 that took place, where we found that ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity had been perpetrated against the Rohingya, we went into Rangoon. We went with our report to talk to different people. And Aung San Suu Kyi and the senior leadership of the NLD were not willing to meet us to discuss that. Neither was the government, for that matter. And what we've seen is no accountability for the abuses that took place in 2012. The government's own study of the situation specifically excluded any discussion of accountability for the rights abuses. So we're now waiting and with a great deal of worry for a plan that's going to come out of the government called the Rakhine State Action Plan that we expect may double down on the rights abusing policies, the essential de facto apartheid of putting Rohingya in these internally displaced persons camps behind wires and walls of security. And we're quite worried that this is a situation where more and more Rohingya are going to be forced to flee because they have no other choice and they have no hope that their lives will improve in Burma.
Muang Zani, there will be elections in Myanmar later this year. Is this going to have any impact whatsoever on the plight of the Rohingya within the country?
Well, if there's going to be any impact, it's going to be negative, because the human rights, the discourse of mobilizing votes using the language of human rights and democracy has not been as effective as mobilizing people's Islamophobia, most particularly anti-Rohingya genocidal racism. And so I think a lot of the political parties are going to pander to the now established anti-Rohingya hatred, and they're being scapegoated for whatever is happening. Muslims are being scapegoated, and Rohingyas are singled out. The Rakhine Action Plan that Phil Robertson mentioned has been likened to the essentially, no exaggeration, even by those who survived the Nazi occupation, as the Burmese version of final solution. Recently, Mr. George Soros, one of the major patrons of Human Rights Watch, visited Rohingya camps and other ghettos in Rakhine State. He came out with a distinct impression as a survivor of Nazi occupation who escaped the Hungary in 1943. And he came out with the sense that this was very much like what he experienced under Nazi occupation in Hungary when he was 15. And so I think we really ought to look at this situation from a different perspective rather than a humanitarian perspective or the perspective of forced migration. This is an international criminal phenomenon.
Well, on that particular point, Muang, I'd like to go to Charles Santiago. We've spoken about the regional impact. We're hearing there that something needs to be done in the wider international community as well. Your view, what can the wider international community do?
Before I answer the question, let me get back to an issue that was raised a few minutes ago and also inform your listeners that the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights received a report 3 weeks ago at the same time during the ASEAN meeting in Kuala Lumpur, heads of government meeting in Kuala Lumpur. And the report actually showed that an increase in anti-Muslim and anti-Rohingya attacks were taking place. And this, according to the report, which was done by experts from the United States as well as parliamentarians from Southeast Asia, who went to Myanmar, feel that this is being used as a way to organize against the Muslim and the Rohingya population. So you will see more attacks on the Muslim population and the Rohingya population in order to secure votes for a variety of groups that are behind this. So I think we will see more of these attacks against minorities in Myanmar.
Well,
now, coming back to the question that...
Okay, carry on, Charles.
Coming back to the question that you had raised, I think most urgently, we need a binding ASEAN declaration on anti-trafficking, a binding anti-trafficking declaration, and it's imminent. I know there's some minimal discussion that is taking place within the ASEAN governments, but we need one where it's urgent, meaning it should be done in the next couple of weeks or months. And maybe we should, at this point in time, get a force within the ASEAN governments to monitor what is happening, at least in the camps, in Myanmar, and also the communities that are outside of Myanmar, namely in Malaysia as well as in Thailand. So maybe ASEAN can send a delegation of people to go into these places. One, to find out the state of affairs, and number two, to provide protection for these people. These are vulnerable people and they need protection now, not 5 years from now. They need protection right now. So ASEAN needs to do something. When we say we are a caring regional organization, then we must behave in that fashion.
Well, Phil Robertson, very quickly, and the wider international community, what do you think they should be doing? The United Nations, for example.
Well, I mean, obviously, the situation with the Rohingya and the abuses they're suffering continues to be condemned by the international community. But I'm immediately focused on the groups of Rohingya that may be afloat on boats in the Andaman Ocean or in the Malacca Straits. I mean, I think right now what we need to be talking about is how do the Thai Navy, the Malaysian Navy, the Indonesian Navy work together to actually go out and find these boats to rescue these people and bring them ashore and provide them with food and other assistance that they need. I think we need to find a way to galvanize a regional response that the international community can support. Getting Burma's neighbors to work together to get Burma to realize that it's no longer acceptable for Burma's discriminatory rights-abusing policies to send the Rohingya sprawling out into the region for the neighbors of Burma to have to deal with.
Well, at that point, my thanks to our guests, Phil Robertson, Wang Zani, and Charles Santiago.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can get in touch with us on our program page at aljazeera.com. You can also post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or you can even tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Mike Hanna, and the whole team here, goodbye for now.